Hey all, this is Redditosker. A new trailer and the release date for Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon has come out. There was also a PlayStation blog interview done with From Software that has a lot of information that isn't clear in the trailer. So in this video we're going to be going through the PlayStation blog interview, but before any of that, we need to talk about the release date, August 25th. August 25th is a lot closer than I think most of us were expecting. I was thinking it would have an October or September release date. And this is important because in a previous, somewhat credible leak/rumor, it was said that they wanted to get Armored Core 6 out before they got Elden Ring DLC out. I had previously thought that we wouldn't be getting any Elden Ring DLC this year, and I was basing that off of the idea that Armored Core wouldn't come out till October or September. August, though, changes things. August is kind of soon. August opens up the possibility of having DLC this year rather than next. There are no guarantees, of course, but we do know that Miyazaki has been working on several games at once, and he started off as the director for Armored Core 6. He laid a lot of the groundwork. Presumably the reason he's not doing the directing for Armored Core 6 entirely is because he needs to focus on his other projects, among which is surely Elden Ring DLC. Anyway, let's look at the PlayStation blog post first. I'm not going to be reading the entire thing, just the information I think is useful. It reads, Armored Core 6 is a new story that takes place on the planet Rubicon, where a powerful energy source called Coral has been discovered. Coral is extremely volatile, and it's already caused a massive disaster that nearly turned all of Rubicon to ash many years prior. Futuristic corporations continue to war for it to this day. Now about Coral. Before Armored Core 6 was announced, there was a leak that talked a little bit about Armored Core 6's story. The leak described Coral, but it wasn't called that back then. It was called Melange, which was a valuable, greatly coveted resource in the book Dune. Now obviously Melange was probably just a placeholder, but it could also suggest that Dune was used as one of the game's inspirations. In an IGN interview with the producer Yasunori Ogura, he mentions that extraterrestrial corporations invaded the planet Rubicon once Coral was rediscovered, and are in conflict with the native population of the planet. Another situation that brings Dune to mind. Back to the article, it talks about some of the new combat features, such as a stagger gauge. Another addition to the series' combat is a stagger element. If an Armored Core takes too many hits over a short period of time, its attitude control system will be overloaded, making it vulnerable for a short time. Both continuous hits and big powerful strikes will cause stagger damage, encouraging you to keep up the pressure on the opponent. The damage inflicted to an enemy's stagger gauge varies from weapon to weapon. It can also be affected by factors like distance, adding additional strategy in equipping and using these armaments in combat. There's also the Assault Boost feature. One of the biggest new features in Armored Core 6 is an instantaneous switch between long-range gunfighting and close-range melee, thanks to a button-activated movement skill called Assault Boost. Assault Boost is an offensive action that helps us close the gap between enemies and lets you quickly go from long distance to close range. It will also provide some incredible chain abilities when fighting, as he describes vividly. Say you activate Assault Boost to make your approach while using machine gun fire and a missile salvo to stagger the enemy. Then you use your pulse blade to score a direct melee hit once you're up close. Speaking of melee, Yamamura had this to say. One aspect we focused on in Armored Core 6 is melee weapons, exclusively equipped to the left hand. These can include Cluster Bomb Thrower, a chainsaw or pulse blade, lances, and other more idiosyncratic weapons. Since the main weapons are firearms, the melee weapons are more focused on that strength of individuality. End quote. Interestingly, he says here that melee weapons are exclusively held on the left hand, which seems to imply you can't dual-wield melee weapons. And I remember that they said previously in other interviews that melee weapons and melee combat is something that they wanted to put extra emphasis on. The game seems to be embracing more complexity in general. The Assault Boost skill we talked about earlier and the stagger mechanic they introduced seems to be examples of that. The trailer showed off what looks like bosses, and the blog post talks about them. There will apparently be a variety of different large bosses, and bosses that are just piloting armored cores like you. The interesting thing that was said in the blog post is that it may take several attempts and some experimentation with your armored core's equipment to fully learn and adapt to a boss's quirks. Now this is interesting because one of my questions was, how hard is this Armored Core game going to be? And this blog post seems to imply that there's some level of expectation that you'll die to these bosses and will have to figure out how to get through them, both mechanically or by going back into the garage and further customizing your Armored Core, or by doing both. Now this next part's probably the most interesting in the article. We asked Yamamura how the pace and feel of the game compares to previous entries. The average movement speed across the game is somewhere between Armored Core 3 and Armored Core 5, he replies, but Armored Core 6 has been developed to bolster the changes of tempo and combat. With instantaneous bursts of speed and sudden changes of tempo, combat can often reach the dizzying heights of, say, Armored Core 4. Now the question of how the game's speed is going to be has been something I've been thinking about since I played Armored Core 4. Looking at the gameplay in the trailer, it's nowhere near the speed of Armored Core 4. Yamamura says it's somewhere between 3 and 5, both titles which were slower than 4. He also says, with dizzying bursts of speed and sudden changes of tempo, combat can often reach the dizzying heights of, say, Armored Core 4. When he's talking about Armored Core 4, I don't think he's talking about the general movement speed across distances. He's already said in that same quote that the average movement speed is going to be between 3 and 5, games that are much slower than 4. What I think he means in this quote is he's talking about combat. He's specifically talking about the tempo and the number of changes that you can make in combat, and he says that it can reach the heights of Armored Core 4, which means that's not how it is all the time. I mention this because the general speed of the gameplay for Armored Core 6 has been an open question up until this point. We hadn't seen any gameplay, and the speed between different Armored Core generations, for example Armored Core 3 to Armored Core 4 to Armored Core 5, is quite different. My understanding from talking to more experienced Armored Core people is that there was a period of controversy when the series moved from Armored Core 3's type of speed to 4 and 4 Answer. That controversy has largely abated, but there were still a lot of people that thought the combat for Armored Core 6 should be closer to their preferred entries. Thankfully, what we see on the screen seems to be a happy medium that will make most people happy. And Yamamura's comments in that interview seem to confirm that. But honestly, it's Armored Core. Armored Core fans are starving. Armored Core 6 could take inspiration from the speed of any of its previous entries, and it wouldn't be a deal breaker for any one of them. Now finally, because I know that this is probably a question on a lot of people's minds, in a different Eurogamer interview, Yamamura talked about the influence that Sekiro and other Souls games have had on Armored Core 6. While the base format of the Armored Core games in Armored Core 6 is very different from the Souls game series and games like Sekiro, we have tried to incorporate some of that design philosophy and our experience over the last several years. I'd like to say that that is definitely present in the aggressiveness of combat in Armored Core 6. We wanted to make something that was very visceral, very aggressive, and has a very clear and distinct rhythm or tempo to the combat. We wanted players to feel those highs and lows, fighting at near distance and far distance. The article then talks about boss battles, another staple of From Software, and they say that these boss battles will be about adapting their mech appropriately and learning attack patterns through repetition. So it does look like at least a little bit of Souls and Sekiro has made its way into Armored Core 6's DNA. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.